An old black woman driving home through a snowstorm spots a young pregnant girl stranded by the roadside, cold, scared, and too proud to ask for help. Without hesitation, she opens her door and drives the girl home. Neither of them knows that this quiet act of mercy will change both their lives forever. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories every day. It was the kind of cold that could break bones. The wind howled through the pines like something alive, clawing at the windows and rattling the eaves of every house that dared to stand against it. Snow had been falling since morning, first soft and lazy, then sharp and relentless, the kind that buried cars, silenced roads, and swallowed sound. Evelyn Brooks drove with both hands gripping the steering wheel, her knuckles pale against the cracked leather. The old Chevy rattled as it crawled up Juniper Hill, headlights cutting narrow tunnels through the whiteout. At 65, her reflexes weren't what they used to be, but she'd driven this road all her life. She could have done it blindfolded, or so she thought. She was coming home from the Wednesday night service at the small Baptist church down in the valley. The hymn still lingered faintly in her ears, soft as breath, there's a light that never goes out. She hummed the tune under her breath, a small comfort in a world that had grown too quiet since her husband Harold passed 2 winters ago. The heater in the truck coughed and wheezed, barely warm enough to keep her fingertips from stiffening. Beside her on the passenger seat sat a thermos of chicken soup, still warm from the church potluck, a gift she hadn't had the heart to refuse but knew she wouldn't eat. Dinner for tomorrow maybe. The road narrowed as she neared the ridge. Juniper Hill had always been lonely this time of year, just scattered houses and a handful of porch lights flickering in the dark. But tonight, the world felt emptier than usual, like something sacred had been cleared away by the storm. Then she saw it. At first she thought it was a shadow, a trick of the headlights, maybe a trash bag caught on the fence, but as the truck rolled closer, the shape shifted, hunched, trembling. Evelyn squinted, heart knocking once against her ribs. A person. She slowed, pulled the truck to the shoulder, and rolled down the window halfway. The wind knifed through instantly, stealing her breath. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. It was a girl, couldn't have been more than 18 or 19, sitting in the snow with her arms wrapped tight around her knees. Her coat was too thin, jeans soaked through, and her hair stuck to her face in frozen strands. And then Evelyn saw it. The small rise of a belly beneath her sweatshirt, unmistakable even in the dark. Pregnant. Evelyn's chest tightened. She put the truck in park and stepped out, boots sinking deep into the drift. The cold hit her like a slap, sharp and immediate, but she kept moving. "Hey now," she called over the wind. "You can't sit out here like that, honey, you'll freeze." The girl flinched, tried to stand, but her legs gave out almost at once. "I'm fine," she rasped, voice hoarse, brittle as glass. "No you ain't," Evelyn said, steady but soft. She reached out a gloved hand. "Come on, let's get you out of this cold." The girl hesitated, eyes wide, the eyes of someone who'd been turned away too many times. For a second, Evelyn saw herself reflected there, younger, fiercer, and just as alone. "I said I'm fine." The girl tried again, though the words shook more than she did. Evelyn didn't argue, she simply shrugged, took off her scarf, and wrapped it around the girl's shoulders. "You can tell me whatever you want later. Right now you're getting warm." When the girl finally let herself be lifted, Evelyn was shocked by how light she was, weightless almost, like the cold had carved her down to bones and fear. She guided her to the truck, opened the door, and helped her climb in. The girl curled up immediately, shivering in silence, eyes fixed on nothing. As Evelyn pulled back onto the road, she glanced sideways. "What's your name, sweetheart?" No answer. "That's all right," she said. "You don't have to talk, not yet." They drove the rest of the way in silence, tires crunching through fresh snow. Outside, the storm raged, but inside the cab it was quiet. 2 souls adrift in the same dark, carried by the hum of an old engine and the faint smell of soup and pine. When the cabin finally came into view, a small sturdy house tucked among the trees, Evelyn exhaled. She parked under the crooked lamppost Harold had installed 20 years ago and shut off the engine. "Home," she murmured. She opened her door, the wind catching her coat, and came around to help the girl. Together they climbed the few wooden steps to the porch. Evelyn pushed open the door and ushered her inside. The warmth hit them like grace, a fire still smoldered in the hearth, throwing soft gold across the room. Evelyn had left it burning before church, just in case, and tonight, she was thankful she did. The girl stopped just inside the doorway, dripping snow, her eyes wide as if she didn't trust any of it. The light, the fire, or the kindness that had brought her here. Evelyn set her gloves on the table and turned back. "There's soup on the stove," she said gently. "You can sit by the fire while I get you a towel." Still no answer, just a tiny nod. As Evelyn stepped into the kitchen, she heard the faint sound of the girl lowering herself onto the rug, close enough to feel the heat. For the first time in a long time, the cabin didn't sound empty. When Evelyn returned with the towel, she knelt beside her guest. The girl's lips were still pale, but her eyes were clearer now. "Here," Evelyn said, wrapping the towel around her shoulders. "You stay put tonight, we'll figure the rest out tomorrow." The girl finally spoke, barely more than a whisper. "Why are you helping me?" Evelyn looked at her for a long moment, the firelight dancing in the lines of her face. "Because somebody helped me once," she said. "And because no one should have to fight the cold alone." Outside, the storm roared on. But inside that small house on Juniper Hill, warmth began to gather, quiet, steady and alive, as if the night itself had paused to watch one stranger save another. The kettle began to hum before the silence broke. Evelyn stood by the stove, stirring the soup, watching thin curls of steam rise into the dim kitchen light. The house was still except for the steady tick of the old clock on the mantel and the muffled whisper of wind pressing against the windows. She moved slowly, her joints aching the way they always did when the weather turned. The girl Sophie, she'd learn later, sat on the rug in front of the fireplace, legs drawn close, wrapped in one of Evelyn's quilts. Her hair was still damp, her cheeks blotched from the thaw of cold. She hadn't said another word since they stepped inside. Evelyn carried 2 bowls to the low table near the fire and knelt down carefully, one hand steadying herself on the arm of the couch. "It's not much," she said softly. "Just chicken soup and cornbread. But it's hot." The girl hesitated, then reached for the spoon. She ate slow at first, cautious, like she was afraid it might be taken away. Evelyn pretended not to notice, only watched the flames shift and dance, the shadows moving like soft hands over the walls. "You from around here?" Evelyn asked after a while. The girl shook her head, barely. "You got folks somewhere?" No answer. Evelyn didn't press. She'd learned long ago that sometimes silence carried more truth than words ever could. The clock ticked on. Snow tapped against the window like fingertips. For the first time in months, the old house felt awake, not busy, not loud, but alive. When the girl finished, she set the bowl down gently, eyes fixed on the fire. Her lips trembled, not from cold this time, but from something else. Evelyn reached over, took the empty bowl, and said, "You can stay upstairs tonight. The room at the end of the hall's got a heater that still works mostly. Bathroom's right beside it." The girl's voice was small, raw. "I don't want to be trouble." Evelyn let out a soft chuckle, not mocking, just kind. "Child, this house has been too quiet for too long. Trouble might be what it needs." That drew the faintest flicker of a smile, quick and shy, there and gone. Evelyn stood, her knees protesting the motion, and carried the dishes back to the sink. The rhythm of washing, the clink of porcelain, the hiss of warm water, filled the room like a lullaby. When she turned around, the girl was watching her. Not suspiciously now, but curiously, like she was trying to remember what safety looked like. "You got a name, honey?" Evelyn asked. A pause, then quietly, "Sophie." Evelyn nodded. "That's a good name. You can call me Miss Eve." Sophie looked down at her hands. "Thank you, Miss Eve." The way she said it, hesitant, respectful, made something in Evelyn's chest loosen. She dried her hands, wiped the counter, and walked back to the fire. "Do you want me to call someone for you?" Evelyn asked gently. "A friend, family, the baby's father." Sophie's face changed, her shoulders stiffened, eyes glassed over with the kind of pain that doesn't make sound. She shook her head once, slow. "There's no one." Evelyn didn't ask again. Instead she took the poker and stirred the fire, coaxing the embers to flare brighter. "Then you got me," she said. "For now that's enough." They sat like that for a long time, two strangers and a fire, the storm outside raging against the walls. Evelyn thought about her daughter, Grace, gone more than 10 years now, her absence still echoing in the corners of this same room. And yet tonight, that ache didn't feel so sharp. Sophie broke the silence first. "You live here alone?" Evelyn nodded. "Just me and the ghosts that can't take a hint." Sophie's brow furrowed. "Ghosts, memories," Evelyn said simply. "They don't make noise, but they sure do stay." The girl nodded, as if she understood more than Evelyn expected. Maybe she did. The young carry ghosts too, just lighter ones. When the last of the soup was gone, and the fire had settled into a soft red glow, Evelyn stood and fetched a folded blanket from the chair. "Come on, child, let's get you upstairs before the floor freezes solid." The staircase creaked under their steps. Evelyn showed her the small guest room. Old wallpaper of faded roses, a patchwork quilt, a lamp that hummed when switched on. It wasn't much, but it smelled like lavender and soap. Sophie stood in the doorway, eyes darting around as if she didn't quite believe this was real. "It's pretty," she said softly. Evelyn smiled. "It's yours tonight." Sophie nodded, clutching the blanket. "Thank you." Evelyn lingered a moment at the door, unsure why she felt reluctant to leave. "You holler if you need anything, you hear? I'm just down the hall." "Okay." As Evelyn turned to go, Sophie's voice stopped her. "Miss Eve?" "Yes, child." Sophie's hand rested on her belly. Her eyes were wide, fragile, but her words were clear. "I didn't think anybody would stop for me." Evelyn's throat tightened. She reached out, brushed the girl's arm gently. "Well, I did, and you ain't invisible here." Then she left her to rest. Downstairs, Evelyn poured herself a cup of tea, sat by the fire, and listened to the storm beat against the world outside. The clock ticked, the flames sighed, and for the first time in years, the house didn't feel haunted. Upstairs, another heartbeat joined hers, faint, rhythmic, new, and Evelyn whispered into the quiet, almost to herself, "Thank you, Lord, for sending her my way." The morning came slow, wrapped in white. Snow still fell outside, not in the wild, angry way it had during the night, but soft and steady, like the sky was exhaling. Every roof on Juniper Hill had vanished under a clean, quiet blanket. The world, for a few precious hours, looked new again. Inside, Evelyn Brooks stirred awake to the smell of wood smoke and the faint pop of embers. The fire she'd banked before bed still glowed, loyal and steady in the hearth. She sat up on the couch where she'd fallen asleep, blanket around her shoulders, knees stiff from the cold. For a moment, she forgot there was someone else in the house. Then she heard it. A floorboard creak upstairs, light and uncertain. The memory returned like a slow dawn, the girl, the snow, the firelight, the way she'd whispered her name. "Sophie." Evelyn smiled to herself, rubbing her palms together for warmth. The cabin hadn't heard footsteps that young in years. She shuffled into the kitchen, lit the stove and set the kettle on. The windows were fogged from the cold outside, and the heat within. Through the haze she could see the trees bowing under their white burden. Everything looked hushed, even time itself seemed to move more carefully, as if not to disturb the peace. By the time she'd fried 2 eggs and warmed yesterday's cornbread, she heard the faint sound of hesitant steps on the stairs. "Morning," Evelyn called out, her voice easy, kind. Sophie appeared in the doorway, clutching the edge of her borrowed sweater. Her hair was loose now, falling over her shoulders in soft tangled curls. She looked cleaner, less like a ghost, though the uncertainty in her eyes hadn't yet thawed. "Morning," she said, her voice small, raw from sleep. "You sleep all right?" Evelyn asked, flipping a cornbread slice onto a plate. Sophie nodded, then shook her head. "I didn't mean to stay." Evelyn smiled gently. "Nobody ever does." She placed the plate on the table, motioned to the chair. "Sit, eat before it gets cold." Sophie hesitated, then sat. She took one bite, then another, slow at first, then faster. Evelyn watched from the counter, pretending to fuss with the kettle but really just letting the quiet stretch between them. Outside, the wind had eased. The light coming through the window was gold, spilling over the wooden table, catching in the strands of Sophie's hair. For a second, Evelyn thought she saw something like peace in that girl's face, fleeting, fragile, but real. "You got plans for today?" Evelyn asked, pouring 2 cups of tea. Sophie looked down at her plate. "I should go, I've already taken too much." Evelyn slid a mug toward her. "You took nothing I didn't offer." The girl's eyes flicked up, unsure how to respond. "You got somewhere to go?" Evelyn asked again, gently. A beat of silence, then quietly, "No." Evelyn nodded. "Then I reckon you're exactly where you're supposed to be." Sophie's mouth trembled, just a little. She set her fork down and wiped her eyes quickly, as if embarrassed by the tears that came without warning. "I don't want pity," she said. "You ain't getting pity," Evelyn replied. "You're getting breakfast." That earned a small reluctant laugh, the first sound of warmth Evelyn had heard from her. They ate in silence for a while after that. The kind of silence that feels like a blanket, not a wall. When Sophie finished, she stood, as if to clean up. Evelyn waved her hand. "Leave it, child. I've been doing dishes longer than you've been breathing." Sophie managed a smile, faint but grateful. Evelyn watched her for a long moment, the way she moved carefully, one hand resting unconsciously over her belly, like she was guarding something fragile but precious. There was a quiet strength there, buried under fear. Evelyn recognized it. She'd carried that same weight once, after Harold died, after Grace was gone, that instinct to survive, even when you didn't believe you could. The kettle hissed softly. Evelyn refilled her cup, then leaned back in her chair. "You know," she said, "the thing about storms is they always make you think the world's ending. But then morning comes, and you realize you're still here." Sophie looked up at her, eyes glistening. "Maybe I don't want to be here." Evelyn's tone softened. "You say that now, but I see you, child. You're still holding on. Folks who truly want to disappear don't shiver like that." Sophie blinked hard, the tears finally spilling. "You don't even know me." Evelyn smiled, a tired knowing smile. "I don't need to. I know that look. Lost people got a shine in their eyes the rest of the world can't see. Maybe that's how God finds us again." The room went quiet again, save for the crackle of the fire, and the sigh of the wind against the window pane. Sophie bowed her head, both hands cradling the life inside her, as if she were trying to listen to 2 heartbeats at once. After a while, Evelyn stood and crossed the room. She rested a gentle hand on Sophie's shoulder. "You stay as long as you need," she said. "This house is big enough for ghosts, and bigger still for the living." Sophie didn't answer, but she didn't pull away either. That was enough. Outside, the storm had finally died. The world was white and waiting, like a page not yet written. And inside the small cabin on Juniper Hill, 2 lives, one nearing its twilight, the other just beginning, sat side by side, watching the snow fall and the fire burn, unaware that somewhere between those 2 things, their stories had already started to weave together. By the 3rd day the snow had stopped falling, but the world remained wrapped in its silence. The drifts along Juniper Hill rose like frozen waves, glittering under the weak sun. Evelyn shoveled the porch in the morning, her breath fogging in the air, her back aching in that dull familiar way that comes from doing what must be done, even when the body protests. Inside, the cabin smelled of cinnamon and pine. She'd lit a candle that morning, habit more than need, and the flame flickered gently on the windowsill beside a small framed photo of her husband, Harold, in his Sunday suit. He smiled from another time, when the house still rang with laughter. Sophie was sitting on the couch near the fire, wrapped in a blanket, her knees drawn close. On her lap rested a small spiral notebook, its edges bent and worn. She'd been writing for nearly an hour, barely moving except to brush her hair from her eyes or turn the page. Evelyn pretended to tidy up the kitchen, but mostly just watched, curious and quiet. After a while, she poured 2 mugs of tea and crossed the room, the floorboards creaking softly under her steps. She set 1 mug on the small table beside Sophie. "You've been at it all morning," Evelyn said gently. "What's got you writing so fierce?" Sophie glanced up, startled, as if she'd forgotten anyone else was there. "It's letters," she said, after a pause. "Letters," Sophie nodded, "for her." Her hand moved instinctively to her belly. Evelyn sat down in her armchair, tea in hand. That baby of yours gonna be one well-read little thing. A flicker of a smile crossed Sophie's face. I just want her to know something real. In case, she trailed off, her voice fading into the crackle of the fire. In case you ain't around to tell her yourself. Evelyn finished softly. Sophie nodded. Evelyn didn't say you will be or don't talk like that. She knew better than to chase away truth when someone was brave enough to speak it. She simply took a sip of her tea, let the warmth spread through her chest and said, "That's love, child, putting something down so she can hold it when you can't." Sophie's eyes softened, her grip on the notebook easing. "You write letters," Evelyn smiled, eyes half on the fire. "Used to Harold after he passed, never mailed him of course, didn't have an address for heaven." "What did you write?" "Everything I couldn't say while he was here. How mad I was at him for leaving. How scared I was of the quiet. How much I missed the way he whistled when he made coffee. That kind of foolishness." "It doesn't sound foolish," Sophie said quietly. Evelyn nodded. "No, I suppose it don't." The fire popped softly, sending a flurry of sparks up the chimney. The light painted gold across Sophie's face, turning her young features solemn, almost ancient for a moment. "Do you ever stop missing someone?" she asked suddenly. Evelyn let out a slow breath. "No, you just learn to carry it different. At first it's like a stone in your pocket, heavy and sharp, but after a while, you smooth it down, and it becomes something else. A weight that reminds you you're still standing." Sophie swallowed hard, blinking fast. Her eyes glistened in the firelight. "I don't have anyone to miss," she said. "Not really. My mom, she told me I ruined everything. Said I brought shame on the family. My dad just looked at me like I'd turned into someone else." The words hung in the air, brittle and cold. Evelyn's heart clenched. She reached for the poker and stirred the fire, letting the sound of crackling wood fill the silence before speaking. "Child, sometimes, folks let their fear talk louder than their love. Doesn't make them right." Sophie stared at the flames. "It still hurts, course it does," Evelyn said softly. "Love always leaves a bruise, but bruises fade, and the heart remembers how to heal if you let it." The younger woman didn't answer right away. Instead she picked up her notebook again, flipping back a few pages. Evelyn could see faint traces of handwriting, uneven, urgent, the kind written in the dark. "You mind if I hear one?" Evelyn asked. "Only if you want." Sophie hesitated, then nodded. She found a page marked with a folded corner and read aloud, her voice trembling but steady. "Dear little one, I don't know what the world will be like when you get here. Some days it feels too hard, too sharp around the edges. But then I feel you move, and it's like the sun finds its way through the cracks again. If I don't make it to see you grow, I hope you know this, you were never my mistake. You were my reason to keep breathing." When she finished, the room went quiet. The only sound was the sigh of the fire. Evelyn's throat tightened. She set her cup down slowly. "That's beautiful," she said, voice thick. "And it's true." Sophie looked up, blinking fast. "You think so, I know so. You put love in words, and love's the only truth that don't wear out." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Sophie stared into the flames, her fingers resting on her belly. Evelyn sat back in her chair, the weight of years pressing against her shoulders, but lighter somehow. In the silence that followed, something shifted between them. Not a word, not even a promise, but an understanding. Two women, bound by loss, by quiet endurance, and by the fragile thread of hope they both kept alive without realizing it. Later that night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Evelyn stayed by the fire. She looked at the empty teacup, the notebook lying on the table, and whispered into the quiet, "You hold on, little one. Your mama's stronger than she knows." Outside, the wind moved through the pines, soft this time, less a howl, more a lullaby, and in the house on Juniper Hill 2 heartbeats, one old, one new, kept time with the crackle of the fire, as if the universe itself had decided to listen. By the time the storm returned, the sky had already turned the color of iron. The wind came first, low and mournful through the pines, then the snow, thick and fast, swallowing the world whole. Evelyn could feel the pressure in her knees long before the first flake fell. That kind of pain only meant one thing: trouble coming. She pulled the heavy curtains shut and tossed another log onto the fire. "We're in for it now," she muttered. The windows rattled like loose teeth. Somewhere outside, the screen door banged once, twice before the wind tore it open completely. Sophie stood near the window, staring at the gray blur beyond the glass. She'd been quiet all day, hands pressed absently against her belly, face pale in a way that worried Evelyn. "You all right, baby?" Evelyn asked. "I'm fine," Sophie said too quickly. Evelyn frowned. "Fine don't sound fine." Sophie turned away from the window. "It's just the weather, makes me ache a little, that's all." Evelyn studied her for a long moment, the way she shifted her weight, how her fingers gripped the table edge. The girl was trembling, that ache got a rhythm to it. Sophie blinked. "What? You heard me. Regular, like every few minutes?" Sophie hesitated. "Maybe," her voice cracked. "I think so." Evelyn's heart sank. "Lord have mercy." She crossed the room in 3 steps, steady despite the stiffness in her legs. "How long you been feeling it?" "Since this morning," Sophie whispered. "But I thought it would stop." Evelyn pressed her lips together, exhaled slow. "It don't sound like stopping, child. Sounds like you're getting ready to bring a baby into this mess." Panic flickered across Sophie's face. "No, not now, it's too soon." Evelyn took her hands. "Hush now, you breathe, hear me. You breathe and listen. You ever done this before?" Sophie shook her head violently, eyes wide. "No, I can't. I don't know how." "Well, lucky for you," Evelyn said, voice calm but firm. "I've done it more times than I can count." "But you're not a nurse?" Evelyn finished for her. "Was one, 40 years. You picked the right porch to freeze on, honey. Now come on, let's get you upstairs before this house turns into an icebox." The wind screamed outside as Evelyn guided her toward the stairs. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Darkness swept through the cabin like a wave. "Miss Eve, I'm right here, child. Ain't no storm gonna scare me off." Evelyn grabbed the lantern from the shelf, struck a match. The flame flared to life, golden and trembling, cutting through the dark. "Hold on to me." They climbed the stairs slowly, one contraction at a time. Sophie gasped and clutched the railing with every wave, her breath coming short and fast. Evelyn murmured soft encouragement, the same way she used to with women in the delivery ward years ago. Steady, rhythmic, sure. When they reached the guest room, Evelyn helped her onto the bed, pulled the quilt back, and set the lantern on the nightstand. The shadows danced over the walls, turning the small space into something that felt sacred and fierce. Outside, the storm roared. Inside, the real one began. Hours blurred into a rhythm: pain, breath, silence, pain again. Evelyn moved with quiet precision, boiling water downstairs, tearing old sheets into strips, whispering prayers under her breath. She'd done this before, but never like this, never with a girl who looked so scared and so young, never with snow battering the world beyond the walls. Sophie clutched her hand through every contraction, her grip iron strong. "I can't," she gasped. "Yes you can," Evelyn said, voice low but firm. "You was made to. Listen to me, baby. Every breath you take brings that child closer to the light. Don't you quit now. I'm so scared." "I know." Evelyn brushed the sweat-soaked hair from her forehead. "But you ain't alone. Not tonight." A howl of wind rattled the roof, the fire downstairs hissed as the chimney groaned. But here, in this small flickering circle of warmth, the world had narrowed to 2 people and one unborn heartbeat fighting its way toward sound. Minutes folded into hours. Evelyn counted softly under her breath, wiped Sophie's brow, murmured things she hadn't said aloud since the last time she delivered a baby back in Jackson Memorial. Push when it feels like the world's breaking. Breathe when it feels like you can't. Then it came, a cry, small but fierce, cutting through the storm like lightning. The sound filled the room, pure and sharp and alive. Sophie collapsed back against the pillows, sobbing, half laughter, half disbelief. Evelyn's hands were steady as she lifted the newborn, slick and pink and squirming, into the towel she'd warmed by the lantern. "Well, look at you," she whispered, voice trembling now. "You loud already." Sophie reached out with shaking hands. "Is she?" "She's perfect," Evelyn said, smiling through tears she hadn't planned on shedding. "Strong lungs, good color. She's got your stubbornness already, I can tell." Sophie cradled the baby against her chest, sobbing quietly as the storm howled beyond the window. "She's so small, small things got the biggest fight," Evelyn said softly. "Don't let that fool you." For a long moment, they just stayed that way, Sophie weeping into the baby's hair, Evelyn sitting beside her, hand on her shoulder, both of them bathed in the glow of the lantern. Outside, the wind began to fade, replaced by the hush of falling snow. Evelyn stood finally, her legs stiff, her heart full. She looked toward the window, where dawn was trying to break through the last of the storm clouds. The world had gone quiet again, the kind of quiet that comes only after something sacred. She whispered, mostly to herself, "Welcome to the world, little one." Sophie looked up, eyes swollen but bright. "Her name's Hope," she said, voice hoarse but certain. Evelyn smiled. "That's a good name. Suits her just fine." Downstairs the fire cracked back to life, sparks rising in the chimney like prayers. Evelyn took one last look at the two of them, the girl and the baby who'd survived the storm, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not just relief, not just gratitude, faith. The storm had left the world hushed. For 3 days the snow lay thick over Juniper Hill, untouched, unbroken, a white ocean stretching past the tree line. It was beautiful, yes, but also cruel, the kind of beauty that tested your will to endure it. Inside Evelyn Brooks's cabin, the fire burned low and steady, the only sound in a house that felt reborn. The old walls that once echoed with silence now held something softer, the faint coo of a newborn, the rhythm of two hearts learning to trust the quiet. Evelyn sat in her armchair by the hearth, mug of tea cooling in her hands. Across the room, Sophie slept curled on the couch, her baby pressed against her chest, tiny fingers twitching in dreams. The quilt slipped down her shoulder, and Evelyn rose slowly, draping it back with a tenderness that came as natural as breathing. She lingered there a moment, watching the two of them, this girl who had fallen out of the storm and into her life, and the child who'd arrived in firelight, fierce and new. For reasons she didn't yet understand, Evelyn felt a strange kind of peace settle over her. The kind that didn't come from prayer or luck, but from purpose. The house felt alive again. The next morning, Evelyn pulled open the door to her late daughter's room. It had been closed for years. The hinges groaned in protest, and dust motes danced in the thin beam of winter sunlight spilling across the floor. Grace's room. Everything was still the same, the quilt her mama had stitched, folded neatly at the foot of the bed, a few ribbons from school choir, a framed photo of her holding a puppy with a grin wide enough to fill the world. Evelyn hadn't had the heart to touch any of it since the accident. Now she stood in the doorway, her hand braced against the frame, the air thick with the ghosts of laughter. "Baby girl," she whispered, voice trembling, "you think I'd be wrong to make room for someone new?" The house didn't answer, but something in the silence felt forgiving. Evelyn stepped inside. She opened the window just a crack, letting the cold air sweep out the stale years. Then she rolled up her sleeves. She worked slow but steady, wiping the dust from the shelves, taking down the old curtains, washing the quilt and hanging it to dry by the fire. She cleared the dresser, leaving only the framed photo of Grace and her smile, not gone, just moved aside to make space. By noon, the room no longer felt like a shrine. It felt like something else, something waiting. That evening, while Sophie fed the baby in the living room, Evelyn dragged a small cradle from the attic. The wood was worn, the paint chipped, but the frame still sturdy. She cleaned it, rubbed it down with linseed oil, and set it near the window where the light would fall warm come spring. The air smelled of soap and pine, and something faintly new, renewal, maybe. Sophie appeared in the doorway, baby in her arms. "Miss Eve, what are you doing?" Evelyn straightened, brushing a hand over her apron, making space. Sophie's brow furrowed. "For who?" "For you and her." Sophie blinked, unsure she'd heard right. "You don't have to." "Hush," Evelyn said gently. "I know I don't have to, but I want to." She nodded toward the cradle. "This used to be my Grace's room. She was about your age when the Lord called her home. I kept it just the way she left it, maybe too long, but I think she'd like to see it used again. Filled with life." Sophie looked around the room, the soft green walls, the quilt folded neatly at the foot of the bed, the small wooden cradle waiting in the corner. Her eyes shimmered. "It's beautiful." Evelyn smiled faintly. It's got good bones. Just needed some air and a reason to open the door. She reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from Sophie's face. You too deserve a space that's yours. Not borrowed, not temporary. Sophie swallowed hard, blinking fast. Miss Eve, Evelyn waved a hand. Don't you start crying now. You'll make me do it too, and I've had enough salt water for one lifetime. But Sophie couldn't help it. The tears came anyway, quiet, grateful ones that ran down her cheeks as she stared at the cradle. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered. You don't, Evelyn said simply. You just take care of that little girl, that's payment enough. She turned back toward the window, watching the light fade to blue over the snow. The storm had left the world cleaner somehow, as if everything broken had been given a second chance. When she looked back, Sophie had placed the baby in the cradle. The child stirred once, then settled, sighing softly, the sound of peace too small for words. She likes it, Sophie said. Of course she does, Evelyn murmured. It's built from kindness, that's the strongest wood there is. They stood together in the quiet, two mothers bound by loss and beginning. The fire downstairs cracked softly. Somewhere outside, the pines swayed under the weight of the fading snow, whispering against the glass like a blessing. And for the first time since Grace's laughter had faded from the halls, Evelyn Brooks felt something like joy, not the sharp kind that burns, but the gentle kind that stays. By late February, the snow on Juniper Hill had begun to loosen its grip. The icicles that hung from the eaves now dripped steadily, forming small rivers along the edge of the porch. The days stretched longer, the light softer, the air carrying the faintest hint of thaw. Inside Evelyn's cabin, life had fallen into a rhythm so gentle it almost felt like a dream. Mornings began with the hiss of the kettle and the low hum of gospel music from the old radio. Sophie would be in the kitchen, rocking baby Hope in one arm while folding laundry with the other, her hair pulled back and her sleeves rolled to her elbows. Evelyn would sit nearby, mending something that didn't need mending, just to keep her hands busy and her heart steady. The house that had once been a tomb for grief had become a home again, full of soft laughter, lullabies, and the quiet sound of a baby breathing. But that kind of peace, Evelyn knew, never lasted untouched. Life had a way of testing even the gentlest blessings. It began on a Thursday morning, with the rustle of mail sliding through the front door. Evelyn bent to pick up the envelopes, bills, flyers, the usual clutter, but among them lay one that stood out. It was cream-colored, with Sophie's name written in careful script. The return address read, the Providence Nursing and Midwifery Training Program. Evelyn turned it over twice, before calling out, Sophie, you got yourself a letter, child. Sophie came from the kitchen, baby balanced on her hip. When she saw the envelope, she froze. Her fingers trembled as she took it. I applied a while back, she said, almost to herself. Didn't think they'd actually. She didn't finish, just stood there, staring at it like it held both her past and her future inside. Go on, Evelyn said softly. Ain't no use waiting for courage to show up before you open it. Sophie smiled faintly at that, then tore it open. Her eyes moved across the page, slow at first, then faster. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Evelyn leaned forward. Well, Sophie let out a shaky breath. They accepted me. The words hung in the air like a bell still ringing. For a heartbeat, Evelyn said nothing. Then she smiled wide and warm. Well, praise God, that's wonderful news. Sophie nodded, clutching the letter to her chest. It's a 1-year program. They cover housing and childcare. I'd learn how to be a nurse's assistant, maybe work toward certification after. She paused, voice faltering. But it's in Providence, that's a few states away. Evelyn's hands stilled on her lap. I see. Sophie looked at her, guilt and hope warring in her eyes. I don't even know if I can go. Hope's still so little, and Evelyn cut her off gently. And you're her mama, that means you do what's best for her. Even if it scares you. Sophie blinked hard, tears gathering. But leaving you, it feels wrong. You've done everything for us. I don't want it to seem like I'm just walking away. Evelyn chuckled softly, shaking her head. Child, you ain't walking away, you're walking forward. Big difference. But this Sophie's voice broke. This place it's the first time I've ever felt safe. Evelyn reached out, took her hand. That's how you know it's real, baby. Real safety don't chain you down, it gives you the strength to go where you're called. Sophie bowed her head, shoulders shaking. Evelyn squeezed her hand tighter, her own throat thick. Listen, Evelyn said, I was your age once, thought the world was too big and too mean to ever hold me right. But it does, in its own way, if you keep walking. This opportunity, it ain't a door closing, it's the one Grace would have wanted you to open. Sophie looked up at her, startled. Evelyn smiled faintly. My Grace wanted to be a nurse too. Never got the chance, so maybe this is the Lord's way of finishing what she started. For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire popped softly in the grate, and the baby cooed in her sleep, a sound so pure it almost hurt. That night, after dinner, Evelyn found Sophie sitting by the window, the letter open on her lap. Hope slept in her arms, the soft rise and fall of her chest steady against her mother's heart. I keep reading it, Sophie whispered, like I'm waiting for it to say something else. What's it say now, that I have to choose? Evelyn settled beside her, the cushion sighing under her weight. Child, life don't wait for us to be ready. It just asks us to be brave. Sophie's eyes filled. I'm scared, Miss Eve. Evelyn smiled gently. Good, means you're about to do something worth doing. Later that night, when the house had gone quiet, Sophie sat alone at the table with her notebook. The firelight flickered across her face as she wrote, slow and deliberate. Dear Hope, today I got a letter, one that could change everything. It's a chance to build something for us, to stand on my own 2 feet, but it means leaving behind the place that taught me what love looks like when it's quiet and patient and real. I don't know what I'll do yet. I just know I want you to grow up brave, brave enough to leave when it's time, and brave enough to come home when you need to. When she finished, she folded the page carefully and placed it in the wooden box by the hearth, the same box that now held months of her words, prayers and fears. Then she went to the nursery. Evelyn was already there, rocking Hope gently, humming an old hymn under her breath. Couldn't sleep? Evelyn asked without looking up. Sophie shook her head. No, me neither. They stayed like that for a while, 2 women, 1 rocking chair, 1 sleeping child. Finally, Evelyn said quietly, whatever choice you make, you won't make it alone. Sophie pressed a trembling hand over Evelyn's. You really think I can do it? Evelyn smiled, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the fire. Baby, you already are. Outside, the snow had begun to melt, dripping steadily from the roof into the dark soil below, and in that rhythm, that slow patient thaw, life was waiting, ready to begin again. The morning Sophie left, the world was gray with mist, not the sharp biting kind that came before a storm, but the quiet kind, the kind that lingered low over the trees like it didn't want to let go. Evelyn stood on the porch, her hands buried in the pockets of her coat, watching the small sedan idle at the end of the drive. The back seat was piled with folded blankets, a travel bag, and a few boxes, all that Sophie owned in this world. Hope was strapped safely in her car seat, bundled in a pink hat that was far too big for her. She blinked against the soft light, unaware that her first goodbye was already being written into her bones. Sophie stood by the open door, face pale, and said in that quiet determination Evelyn had come to recognize, a kind of strength born not from confidence, but necessity. I left the baby monitor, and the extra formula in the kitchen, Evelyn said. Her voice came out steady, though her heart thudded hard beneath her ribs. You take them, can't have you spending money on what's already here. Sophie smiled weakly. Miss Eve, you've already given us more than enough. Evelyn waved a hand, brushing off the words. Don't argue with an old woman, child. You'll lose every time. That got a small laugh, soft but real, a sound Evelyn knew she'd miss more than she wanted to admit. Sophie stepped closer, her breath visible in the cold. I don't know how to say goodbye. Evelyn looked at her for a long time, then shook her head. Then don't, just say see you soon. Goodbyes sound too final, and I ain't in the mood for final. Sophie's eyes filled, and for a moment she looked 16 again, scared, small and holding the weight of too much life too soon.
She reached out and hugged Evelyn, one arm around her shoulders, the other cradling Hope between them. The baby stirred, then sighed softly. Evelyn pressed her wrinkled cheek against that tiny head and inhaled powder and milk, and something impossibly pure. "You take care of her," she whispered. Sophie's voice cracked. "I will, and take care of you too. She's gonna need both of you standing."
When they pulled apart, Evelyn slipped something into Sophie's hand, a folded envelope, worn soft from being handled too much. "What's this?" Sophie asked. "Just a letter," Evelyn said. "For later, not now. When the noise gets too loud and you start doubting yourself." Sophie nodded, too choked up to answer. She climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and rolled down the window. "I'll write," she said. "You'd better." Evelyn smiled, but her hands were trembling inside her pockets. "And when you're tired of the city, you come back up this hill. There'll be soup on the stove and a bed waiting." Sophie nodded once, eyes glistening, then eased the car into gear. The tires crunched over the gravel drive, the taillights glowing faint red through the fog. Evelyn stood there until the sound of the engine faded, until the mist swallowed them whole. Only then did she turn and walk slowly back inside. The house met her with silence, not the peaceful kind that comes after laughter, but the hollow kind that presses against your ribs, the kind she thought she'd already learned to live with. But this time, it felt different. The crib was still in the corner of Grace's old room, the quilt folded neatly over the side. A small rattle lay on the dresser, forgotten, or maybe left on purpose. The faint scent of baby powder still lingered in the air. Evelyn ran her hand over the cradle's edge, the smooth wood cool under her palm. "Lord," she whispered, "why do the goodbyes keep finding me?" She didn't expect an answer, but sometimes speaking the ache out loud was its own kind of prayer. Downstairs she brewed a pot of tea and sat by the fire, the house settling around her like an old coat that no longer fit. The radio on the shelf stayed silent. She didn't turn it on. She just watched the flames and listened to the ticking of the clock, that steady patient rhythm that didn't care who was there to hear it. For days she moved through the house in half steps, cleaning things that didn't need cleaning, cooking for two when there was only one. Every corner reminded her of them. The rocking chair that creaked from late-night lullabies, the mug Sophie always left by the sink, the echo of a baby's laugh that seemed to linger in the rafters, long after it should have faded. And yet beneath the loneliness there was something else, something she hadn't felt after Grace died. Pride. That girl had come here broken, shivering in the snow, and walked away standing tall, strong, ready. Evelyn had been part of that, a witness, a helper, a midwife, not just to a baby, but to a new beginning. Still the quiet hurt. At night she sat by the fire with the wooden box on her lap, the one that now held all of Sophie's letters to Hope. She opened it slowly, touching the pages as if they might bruise, tracing the handwriting that had once filled her living room with hope. And then, one evening in early spring, a letter came. The return address read Providence, Rhode Island. Evelyn's hands shook as she tore it open. "Dear Miss Eve, we made it. The place is small, but it's ours. Hope's growing fast. She laughs now, the kind of laugh that fills the whole room. Classes start next week, and I'm terrified, but I keep hearing your voice in my head. Be brave, child. So I'm trying. I miss the sound of the fire, and your stories. I miss the way the world slowed down up there. I'll visit soon, I promise. Until then, thank you for everything. For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. Love, Sophie and Hope." Evelyn read it 3 times, each slower than the last. When she was done, she pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. The clock ticked on. The fire burned low. The night wrapped itself around the house like an old friend. And though the chair beside her was empty, Evelyn didn't feel alone, not tonight. Because some people leave, she realized, but not everything they give you goes with them. Some love lingers, in walls, in laughter, in letters, especially the kind built from kindness. The first snow of the new year came quietly, almost shyly, as if it remembered how much pain it had brought before. Juniper Hill was white again, though not buried this time, just brushed with a fine dusting that caught the early light. The air was cold but gentle, the kind of cold that carried memory, rather than warning. Evelyn Brooks moved slower now. Her hands shook a little when she poured her morning tea, and the stairs creaked louder beneath her weight. But her mind was sharp, and her eyes, though dimmed by age, still carried that soft fire of someone who refused to give up her watch over the world. She had been feeling the shortness of breath for months, a dull pressure in her chest that came and went like an uninvited guest. Her doctor had called it manageable, which was a polite way of saying inevitable. Still, Evelyn didn't dwell on it. She kept her days full feeding the birds, mending quilts for the church, and checking the mailbox at the end of the drive, a habit she couldn't break. The letters had slowed over the years, but every so often, one would still come from Providence. The handwriting was steadier now, the tone more confident. Dear Miss Eve, Hope started kindergarten last week. She asked if angels really listen when we talk. I told her yes, because you always did. I'm working part-time at a clinic now. I think you'd like it. I hear your voice every time I tell someone breathe baby, just breathe. Evelyn smiled each time, smoothing the page, her thumb brushing over the ink like it was something alive. But in the quiet hours, when the fire dimmed low and her chest tightened again, she whispered to the empty room, I'd sure like to see that child again, before the Lord decides I've overstayed. She didn't know that wish was already on its way back to her, carried in a silver car winding its way through the winter hills. Sophie hadn't driven this road in years, yet every turn felt familiar, every pine, every old fence post leaning tiredly toward the snow. Hope sat in the back seat, nose pressed against the glass, eyes wide. Is this where you grew up, Mama? She asked. Sophie smiled. No, baby, this is where we started. The road climbed higher, the world narrowing into quiet woods and long shadows. The sign for Juniper Hill appeared, half buried under frost. Sophie's heart kicked once in her chest. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed the smell of pine, the way the cold here tasted different, cleaner, older. She'd spent 5 years in the city, built a small life, a job at the clinic, a cozy apartment, routine, but nothing, not a single morning of hospital coffee or bright fluorescent light, had ever felt as real as that first night by Evelyn's fire. Hope, now 5, hummed in the back seat, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Will she remember us? Sophie's throat tightened. She will. As the cabin came into view, nestled at the curve of the hill, smoke curling from its chimney, Sophie had to pull over for a moment. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel. She remembered every detail, the flicker of the porch light, the smell of wood smoke, the sound of Evelyn's voice saying, You ain't invisible here, child. For a long moment, she just sat there, heart pounding, before whispering, We're home, Hope. The knock came while Evelyn was dozing in her armchair. She woke with a start, blinking through the haze of afternoon light. It took her a second to realize it wasn't the wind. Someone was actually at the door. Hold your horses, she muttered, pushing herself up. Her knees popped as she crossed the room. When she opened the door, the world tilted. There stood Sophie, older, stronger, her hair pulled back, her eyes brighter but still carrying that same quiet fire. And beside her, half hiding behind her mother's coat, a little girl with brown curls and eyes, the color of warm chestnuts. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Evelyn's breath caught in her chest. Well, I'll be damned, she whispered, a laugh breaking through the tears that had already started down her cheeks. I was just thinking about you this morning. Sophie smiled through her own tears. Guess I heard you. Evelyn's gaze fell to the child. And who's this pretty thing? Hope stepped forward shyly. I'm Hope. Evelyn's voice softened to a hush. You sure are. Sophie knelt, smoothing Hope's curls. This is Miss Evelyn. She helped bring you into the world. Hope's eyes widened. You did. Evelyn chuckled, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. Well, somebody had to catch you, sugar. You came out hollerin' like you had something to say. Hope giggled, and that sound, that bright clean joy, filled every quiet corner of the house. Evelyn stepped aside, holding the door wide. Well, don't just stand there freezin'. Come on in. The fire's waitin'. As Sophie crossed the threshold, warmth wrapped around her, not just from the fire, but from the air itself, thick with memory. Everything was just as she'd left it. The quilt over the armchair, the wooden box by the hearth, the smell of tea steeping somewhere unseen. It felt like walking back into a part of herself she didn't know she'd been missing. That evening, the cabin was alive again. Hope sat on the rug, playing with the carved wooden toys Evelyn kept in a small basket, old ones, lovingly sanded smooth over the years. Evelyn watched from her chair,
her heart swelling with a joy that hurt a little. Sophie moved easily around the kitchen, reheating soup and slicing bread. She glanced over her shoulder every few minutes, smiling whenever Hope made Evelyn laugh. It was as if time had folded, the years apart reduced to a long breath between sentences. "You didn't tell me you were comin'," Evelyn said between spoonfuls. Sophie smiled softly. "I didn't plan it. We were on winter break, and I just needed to see you." "Well, I'm glad you listened to that need," Evelyn said. "You always did have good instincts, once you stopped running from them." Sophie laughed, shaking her head. "You haven't changed a bit." "Lies," Evelyn said, patting her knee. "I've got twice the wrinkles and half the knees I used to." They both laughed, the kind that warmed rather than aged. Later, after Hope had fallen asleep under the quilt on the couch, Sophie sat by the fire with Evelyn, a cup of tea between them. The firelight painted their faces in golden shadow. Evelyn studied her quietly. "You look settled," she said. "You found your footing." "I did," Sophie nodded. "I've been working at a small clinic outside Providence, mostly maternity and postnatal care." She smiled faintly. "Every time a baby cries, I hear your voice saying, 'Breathe, honey, the world's waiting for you.'" Evelyn chuckled low. "You see, I told you that baby of yours wasn't the only one being born that night." Sophie looked at her, eyes glistening. "You saved me, Miss Eve, more times than you'll ever know." Evelyn reached over, squeezing her hand. "I didn't save you, child. I just held the door open till you remembered how to walk through it." They stayed a week that first visit, then a week became 2. Sophie repaired the steps on the porch that winter had gnawed through, cooked in the kitchen like she'd never left, and walked with Evelyn down to the postbox every afternoon. Hope spent her mornings drawing beside the fire, making portraits of Nana Eve, her curls, her cane, her big smile, all rendered in bright crayon lines. "Am I really that round?" Evelyn teased one morning, holding up the picture. Hope grinned. "You said kindness makes people big, so you must be very kind." Evelyn laughed until she had to sit down. Lord, this child knows how to flatter her elders. When spring finally came, the snow melted into 1,000 glittering streams down the hill. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. Sophie planted flowers out front, daffodils and forget-me-nots, while Hope chased robins along the fence line. Evelyn watched from the porch, wrapped in her shawl, her heart so full it almost frightened her. One evening, as they sat watching the sun dip behind the trees, Sophie said quietly, "I don't think I can go back." Evelyn turned to her. "To the city?" Sophie nodded. "I've been away too long. I thought I was building something there, but it doesn't feel like home anymore." Evelyn smiled gently. "Then you already know your answer." "I don't want to be a burden," Sophie said. Evelyn's laugh was soft, deep. "Child, if you were a burden, I'd have let you freeze out there the first night." Sophie smiled through her tears. "You sure you're ready to share your quiet again?" Evelyn's eyes shone. "Quiet's overrated." So Sophie stayed. By summer, the house on Juniper Hill had changed again, fuller, warmer, alive in a way it hadn't been in decades. Evelyn took to calling Hope her shadow, because wherever she went the little girl followed, carrying baskets of laundry, picking dandelions, or just asking endless questions about everything under the sun. Sophie found part-time work at the town clinic. On weekends, she helped Evelyn with community visits, checking on old folks, bringing soup and laughter to the ones who'd stopped expecting either. And in the evenings, when the fire burned low, Sophie wrote again, not for herself this time, but with Hope beside her, both of them scribbling in the same notebook, one drawing flowers, the other words. Evelyn would sit nearby, pretending to read but really just listening. One night, Sophie asked, "Do you ever think about how strange it is, how we all ended up here, like this?" Evelyn smiled, the lines around her mouth soft in the firelight. "Some things ain't strange, baby, they're just the Lord's way of fixing what people break." She leaned forward, resting her hand over Sophie's. "You gave me back something I thought I'd lost for good." Sophie blinked back tears. "You mean grace?" Evelyn shook her head. "I mean hope, the kind you can hold." The fire cracked, a log splitting softly in two. Hope, already half asleep on the rug, stirred and mumbled, "Nana Eve, yes sugar, are we family?" Evelyn looked at Sophie, who smiled through tears, then back at the child. "Baby," she said, voice trembling. "We been family since the night your mama knocked on my door." Hope grinned, satisfied, and drifted back to sleep. Outside, the stars stretched wide across the hill, their light spilling down through the pines like blessings. Evelyn sat back, eyes closed, whispering a prayer she'd said many times before, but that tonight felt finally answered. "Thank you, Lord, for letting kindness come home." Years later, when people spoke about the house on Juniper Hill, they said it always looked like it was smiling, warm light spilling from the windows, flowers blooming even through early frost. Inside, the wooden box still sat by the fire, but now it held more than letters, drawings, recipes, pressed flowers, crayon hearts, the story of 3 lives that had once drifted apart and found their way back together. And if you listened closely, you could almost hear it, the crackle of the fire, the soft hum of an old woman rocking in her chair, and the faint laughter of 2 voices, one grown, one young, telling the world, in their own way, that love had never really left this hill, because kindness, once given, never dies, it just changes hands.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.